we kick it off? Welcome everybody who's in attendance right now. We have about 45 attendees, but the number is continuing to go up, so I'm sure that all those who registered will continue to join as we proceed. My name is Adam Chapdelaine. I work as the town manager in Arlington, and I've been part of this multi-town gas leaks initiative for the better part of, well, I guess it feels like a couple years now, and also on the local level with Arlington's Gas Leaks Task Force. But what we want to talk about today are the impact of gas leaks on trees. We could speak for a whole hour, obviously, or more about the benefits of trees in our communities, and we will get into that through the panelists' remarks today. But what we really want to talk about is the impact of gas leaks on trees and the efforts that several municipalities have been taking to try to mitigate these impacts or even stop these impacts. So a little bit of history. There's been this multi-town gas leaks initiative for the better part of the last several years. And it's been a number of communities in the Metro Boston region and beyond that have come together to try to work with National Grid to be honest, work towards a gas-free, carbon-free future, but most immediately work to fix the multitude of gas leaks that are occurring across all of our communities. There's so many negative environmental impacts and public health impacts and even public safety impacts related to gas leaks. So rather than working community by community with the utility, we brought together this group of like-minded, some elected officials, some appointed officials, some community advocates to begin to work on this issue. We have had a lot of positive engagement with National Grid through this effort. We've been very lucky to have the Metropolitan Area Planning Council helping us coordinate this effort. They've really played a great role in keeping us on track and continuing the dialogues with National Grid. There have been a number of working groups that have been set up in partnership with National Grid about communication, about clarity, about the schedule of repair. Unfortunately, the National Grid has not been willing to be part of this working group about trees. However, because of how important we found the issue of trees and gas leaks to be, we still created this working group that's now met via Zoom once and has started to look at the best practices that municipalities have put in place because we want to be able to hopefully publish and share these best practices in the hopes that someday we can convince National Grid to work with us more cooperatively and more proactively to begin to address gas leaks where they are impacting trees. So we have now up to 65 attendees on this call today. So what we want to do is we want to talk about the science behind gas leaks in trees. We want to talk about the scope and look at some of the testing that's been done to see just how widespread these leaks are and how they're impacting trees. And then we want to look very locally at what several municipalities have been doing to combat this issue. So we have a great panel. We're going to hear from them. They're going to go about 10 minutes each. And then we're going to use whatever time is left for questions and answers. There is a Q&A feature in Zoom that we'd like to ask you to use. If questions come up while the presenters are speaking, feel free to input them into the Q&A feature. But we're going to go through all three presentations and then begin to address the Q&A at the end of the presentations. So with that, and one more thing to mention, this meeting is being recorded. We're recording it so that we'll be able to share it with those who weren't able to attend today. But just keep that in mind. Being the webinar format, the only videos that will be shown are those of the speakers. So you don't have to worry about what might be captured in terms of your own video, but be aware that it is being recorded. I don't want anybody to be surprised by that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Phillips, who I'll allow to introduce himself and his credentials so that I don't get them wrong. But he's going to walk through the science of gas leaks in trees. So with that, I'll introduce Nathan.
Thank you so much, Adam, and thank you all for moderating this and your work on the multi-town initiative. And also huge thanks to Lisa Olney for all of her leadership in the multi-town gas initiative as well. So I'm here to talk to you about the science of gas leaks, and back it up couple slides there. Yes, and so we're going to talk about the science. It's going to be a quick overview, But like with so many other issues, these are stories as well. And this tree is kind of my story of gas leaks. This is, and tree damage. This is in the town of Newton on the campus of LaSalle College. This is a 60-inch copper beech tree. It was first introduced to me by my colleague, who you'll hear from, Bob Ackley. And you can see already this tree is showing some signs. This is several years ago. It's kind of shying away from the street. There's a cast iron gas main under that street. And if we go to the next, click forward, please, advance. Adam, if you would. Hopefully that's advancing. Am I frozen or someone else?
I'm trying to advance and now it's not cooperating. Give me 1 second here.
Okay. So by 2018, that tree had been removed. And you'll possibly see that showing up there on the advance of that slide.
See it now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
So this is a really sad story for such a magnificent tree to be removed, and we knew there was a leak. So if you go to the next slide, please. This had been called in, this leak had been called in over multiple years, and what you'll see in the next slide, and get there, is the readings of the gas in the soil. It was 68% gas. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy there, but that combustible gas indicator indicates 68% gas in the root zone right at the base of that tree. So starting with that story, but that's an anecdote, and the science is about more than anecdotes. So let's go forward now and just get into the science of it. And so I want to just make this point right from the start. The causes of tree damage by gas leaks are well established. My go-to text here is a 1995 book. I'm a tree physiologist. I did my PhD at Duke University in plant ecophysiology, focusing on trees, water and carbon relations of trees and soils, water flow. And so this book by Paul Kramer and John Boyer in 1995 actually is a revision from a book by Paul Kramer in 1983. And we know from these books or any plant biology text that you pick up that the causes are well known. So I just want to make that point. Decades of research have established this link between gas leaks and tree damage. This was a particularly important work by Hoeks in the Netherlands that found that the oxygen content in the root zone went down when gas was introduced. The CO2 level in the root zone went up in the gas soils. We'll come back to that. That's one of the major papers back in 1972. Next slide, please. This next slide is by Spencer Davis Jr. Over at Rutgers University back in 1977. I highly recommend that you take a look. I have the links in this presentation, or I'll make them available. It's only 2 pages and it does an excellent summary. And this is back in 1977 about the fact that we knew that gas was damaging trees. Next slide, please. And I had to throw this slide in, even though this gets into a little bit of Bob's talk a bit about signs. It's the science, but it's also the manifestation, the symptoms that you can see. So many of the people on this call may know that there's a fungus, Ganoderma genus, that shows up at the base of trees, particularly ones that are gassed. And this paper in the Bulletin of the Torrey Botanical Club goes back to 1957. And I highlighted some text there where the link between gassed trees and this fungus and tree damage and death was observed. So again, going back many and many decades, and just, in the lower right there, you can't even see anything there, but that's just my signaling that the geneticists now and the people who understand the physiology are finding out how this Ganoderma is metabolizing the methane that's in the soil. So that complicated pathway there, methane is going in, it's being oxidized, by the Ganoderma in its process of metabolism. So we're understanding more and more about the science, but the science is really settled going back decades, like this paper shows. Next slide, please. Okay, so this should have mentioned a content warning here before, and I know this is a bit shocking to put in here, but you know, we hear these kinds of things about causation. You know, what's the real cause of damages? In this case, you know, people will say, well, it's not the guns that kill people, it's the people. Well, maybe it's the bullets that do the damage, actually. So one of the issues that comes up that makes this maybe not as obvious about how trees are damaged is really the proximate versus the ultimate causes. And so if we go to the next slide, I'll explain what that means with regard to gas leaks. So really, what happens in the physics, in the science in a nutshell, the physics is that the gas, when it leaks, it displaces oxygen from the root zone. Next slide. And also that gas is dry, so it desiccates the soil. There's basically no humidity in there. Going further into the chemistry now, we're getting more into the direct causes. Root metabolism is inhibited by low oxygen. So you know, this equation here is kind of like photosynthesis in reverse. This is respiration. This is taking carbohydrate, CH2O, and oxidizing it, producing CO2 and water vapor and energy. So the roots need to breathe. They need the oxygen so that they can use energy to maintain themselves and to grow new roots. And when there's no oxygen down there, or there's little oxygen down there, that metabolism by the roots is inhibited. The other thing that's going on is that there are microbes down in that soil, and methane is energy rich. CH4 has a lot of chemical energy in it, and so they're eating that stuff. They're metabolizing it, and they're using oxygen. They're taking the oxygen, they're combining it with the CO2, and they're producing CO2 and H2O as well, and gaining energy from them. So that's the basic science in a nutshell. Next slide, please. And so going back to this real, you know, established science, this is from that textbook, you know, Kramer and Boyer, 1995. It appears that bulk air concentrations above 10% are adequate for roots of most plants. Okay, next slide. And so what we see then is, you know, this is just one of so many different studies. This is a federal report back in 1995 on, these were established oak trees that kind of show that. So you can see the decline in those cork oaks, valley oaks, and blue oaks going down to zero with the root growth. And it does match to about, you know, get down below 10% and things start to really decline there in terms of the root function. Next slide. And just in the last few days in preparation for this talk, Bob and I got together, and he's just got volumes and volumes of data where he's looked at the soil O2 content and simultaneously switched over his gas combustible indicator to measure the gas content at the same time in the same place. And when you start to put all that data together, you see this effect, okay, so that the more soil gas there is, the less soil oxygen there is. Now, there's a couple of very interesting features about this. So if you go to the place where Kramer and Boyer said about 10% is where you start to see suffering of the roots, you know, that corresponds to about 25% gas percentage there. If you see that point that's kind of right on the curve there. And so it doesn't take a whole lot. But if you think about that, you know, oxygen is at most about 20%, right? 21% of the atmosphere in a healthy, well-drained soil, aerated soil should be about 20%. And you would think if there's a direct displacement that 25% gas would be displacing 25% of the oxygen. But now we're seeing it's cut in half. Okay, so what is going on there? It's got more of an outsized effect than just the displacement. And that's where the microbes are coming in. They're also eating that methane up and consuming oxygen from the soil to do that. And what we think there is that that's having an impact way down, even as you get close to 0% soil gas. You see how all those points are stacked up on the zero line there? We think that on the fringes of the gas leaks, when you go out and measure gas to the very edge where you no longer detect it, we think that those microbes are still operating in that range to draw down the oxygen and use up methane that would have been there, but they are consuming down to zero, but they're still having that effect on lowering the oxygen rate. Next, or oxygen concentration. Next slide, please. Now, this work continues, and the most recent work was published just last month by Claire Skolart and including Bob Ackley and colleagues at BU School of Public Health. And they looked at Chelsea, and this was the widest urban study that I'm aware of that looked at in situ trees, actual street trees, and they found that dead or dying trees in Chelsea had 30 times more likelihood to have gas in the root zone than other control trees that they had. And they also had less oxygen in those root zones. And so this has been a very important paper. It's gotten a lot of press recently, and in fact also because it connects with the coronavirus and the environmental justice community in Chelsea, and the fact that people are more susceptible to the impacts of COVID when they have things like the urban heat island, and when they have higher pollution, all of the things which you know that the trees help to ameliorate. Next slide, please. There's a lot that we still don't know, even though that the science is established. We know enough, but there's still things that we need to know. This is a Norway maple tree that still puzzles me to this day. Bob arranged for the town of Hingham to dig up this dead, dying Norway maple, and in that sandy soil, when we were going through and looking at it as they dug it up, we saw this bizarre blue color. We don't even still quite know what's going on in terms of the biochemistry of gas leaks and how they might be affecting the biology of the trees itself, beyond that oxygen deprivation and desiccation effect. Next slide.
And I'm going to give you a 1 minute warning, Nathan.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. We don't know things like, whether some trees are more susceptible species, like our bottomwood, swamp trees, since they are associated with anoxia or hypoxia, are they more resilient against gas leaks than trees that require more aerated soils? We don't know that. Root anatomy, here's a normal looking corn root, and if we go to the next slide, you can see from this outer cortex layer, those big openings, those are indications of the plant. This is a corn root grown without oxygen. And you can literally see that these roots are so-called trying to get more airways. This is called parenchyma, to get air from above down into the root zone. So there's a lot of anatomical things that we still need to find out as well. Next slide. Should be good. And going back to that finding that Bob and I put together from his data taken in Newton, we see that if you're well outside of a gas leak, you get 20% oxygen in well aerated soils. But even when you're getting no gas detection at the fringe of the gas leak, you see that average depression down to 17%. What we still need to find out is, are we seeing a CO2 rise associated with that reduction in oxygen contents? Because if it is because of those microbes down there, they're eating that methane, they're producing CO2, and the CO2 should be higher. So that we have a hypothesis that we're still working on there. Next slide. So just to conclude, methane doesn't kill trees, it's mostly the anoxia. And with that, I'll just say thank you to all of the partners in this research and pass it along to Bob Ackley.
Okay. I'm going to share screen.
We'll turn it over to you, Bob. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. How are we doing? Does that look okay?
Yeah, if you go to the presentation view, you should be all set.
Okay, and I have control. Thank you. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I'm Bob Ackley from Gas Safety Inc. And I want to talk about protecting our urban forest. And let me just say thank you, Adam and Lise and Brandon and Nathan and everyone involved. Thank you so much for putting this together. Protecting our urban forests and identifying gas pipeline leaks damaging trees, something I've been involved with for quite a few years now. Let's see what this advance. Okay, so for a little bit about me, for 40 years, oh, wait a minute, going a little fast here, hold on, go back. Okay, so for 40 years, I've been in industry compliance with pipeline surveys, operator qualification, and training of people to conduct surveys. I was trained in 1979 to find gas leaks through observing vegetation. The vegetation survey was the standard method used to conduct compliance gas leak surveys. So that's how we found them. I was trained. People went around, just looked at grass, trees, and shrubs. And Northeast Gas Association, let me see if this all works here. They all know about this. Right here, we have dead vegetation or that appears dying for no apparent reason. So they're fully aware of what's been going on here for years. The Northeast Gas Association President Tom Kiley testified about this the Telecommunications and Energy Commission, where the utilities have a mechanism in place to compensate property owners for damage to trees if they've been damaged by natural gas. So they've been aware of this for years, and you can go to that. So what do we have for gas leak indicators? If we go to the gas leak indication, you know, is there a gas odor, blowing dust? If you see that, that's really bad. Dead or dying vegetation for no apparent reason, and insects are things that we know that gas attracts insects and other things. So what does it look like out on the street? We were out just a week or so ago on Newton Street, Washington Street, Newton rather, and there's a joint leak out in the middle of the street here affecting this linden tree. So we see the small leaves or no leaves and thinning crown and slow death. This is a tree in Brookline, Upland Road, an oak tree that's had gas all through the root zone. So you can see it's dying from the top and just about a loss here. And here's a tree right next door, 55-inch oak tree that's had a small gas leak at it for a number of years now, but we can see that it's really in decline. Here's Columbus Ave in Brookline, and this was just last week. There are gas leaks going right down the sidewalk here. There's a main right in the sidewalk here, and there's 4 tree locations. And I get these calls from residents about, you know, what can we do here? You know, they think that it's gas, so we need to get these reported. So how does the tree professional figure out what's going on? Well, the first thing, are there gas pipes in the vicinity? Is there a gas odor? And there's certain tells out there, you know, are there gas meters that indicates that there's gas service? Are there pipeline markouts? And I know that most tree professionals, you know, deal with markouts all the time, so they understand that gas is yellow and blue is water and red is electric. And, you know, so pipeline markouts really help us a lot in figuring out where the gas pipes are and if there's leaks. And you know, insects is another thing that comes around. So here's a few things that we see out in the street. Here's a yellow gas mark on a new pipe, a new line right there. There's a trench in the street. Here's a gas meter, just in case you didn't know what it looked like. Some people have no idea. So just to, you know, give you an idea. Here's a gas main, and we can tell that they put a new gas line in this area, but there's 3 joints that they tried to fix here, and they couldn't quite figure it out. So we know there was a cast iron main in there, but we see patches in the street. And that lets us know that there's gas around now. Then there's markings. This one says 6-inch cast iron, just faded in right here. So we know that's an old pipe if it's cast iron. And bad pipes usually create more leaks. There's more leaks when the pipe's old. And what we see here is drill holes in the street. And when you work around cities and towns, you see these drill holes. This is how we pinpoint gas leaks. And here's where the gas leak repair was. But so often where there's one leak, there's another leak, and we get repeat locations. It's bad pipes. So just because there's a leak that appears to be repaired, it generally is not repaired. Here's a maple borer that my arborist picked off, Carl Cathcart picked off this one on a gas-infected tree in Newton on Washington, on Center Street rather. So we see these ants and insects, and they're all attracted to these trees. So tree wardens, you know, what can you do? We're testing planting sites for presence of gas leak. We're testing tree removals, test any tree that is in decline for pipeline gas leakage, and use publicly available data on gas leak locations. And that's where I, let me see if I might have the map right here. I can click on this map, see if it just clicks over here. HEET, this group nonprofit out of Cambridge has mapped all the publicly reported data for years, since 2015 when the operators came out. And you can actually get the data on what they repaired since 2015 and what's not repaired. And, you know, we can go to any location that they've mapped all the leaks in Massachusetts. So if you get a call to a location, you can easily go there and take a look and see if there's an existing gas leak that they know about. They may not know about it. That doesn't mean that there's not a gas leak there. But this data is so great to have. And there's other things that we can do with what's available on the internet. And you can see all these leaks here. The red I just clicked on is all the repair locations. And then that's just another year. That was just last year. So there's so many leaks that they repaired. When you come across a sick tree, what you should be thinking about is there gas there at the location? So I just wanted to give you a quick little video that I did actually this morning on testing a site and how easy it is. It's not really a big deal. The gas detector here, I'll just go through a quick.
I just want to show a little combustible gas indicator testing. This is a Bascom Turner combustible gas indicator made right here in Massachusetts. And there's a couple of different ways. The easiest way to put a test hole in is just with a long screwdriver. And we can come down and push the screwdriver down to get in about 6 inches. And then put our instrument into the hole and take a reading. And that's really as simple as it can be. And you would want to go around the drip line of any tree. Another tool that can be used is called the T-bar. Same type of thing where we can push this into the ground about 6 inches. And that takes care of the dig safe laws. And then we just put our probe in and take our gas reading and record. And this is the tool the gas industry uses called a puncher bar or slang bang bar. And this will punch a hole down 2 to 3 feet to help pinpoint a leak. But this is the standard instrumentation used by the gas industry to detect and assess natural gas leaks. So very easy equipment, about $1,000 to $1,500 depending on the features for the Bascom Turner Sentry. This is about $200. The T-bar, if you can find them, about $100. And the screwdriver probably about $5 or $10. So that's all the equipment you need to test trees. Okay.
So that was pretty easy. To kind of end up here, we have I work with Lily Lombard out in Northampton and Brandon. And I'm not sure how much Brandon's going to cover, but we do have a gas leaks detection protocol pertaining to urban trees that we've made up that we'll share with everybody. But it's basically what we said here: test new planting sites for gas, test and be aware that gas could be damaging your existing mature tree. And by fixing the leak, you're going to save the tree. And I think that that's what you need to really concentrate on, is saving your mature trees and saving on your plantings. But having this as a tool in your bag to diagnose tree damage and you know what's going on with your trees, and hopefully save a lot of trees. We can go through that a little bit more, but I want to thank everybody. We do. I'm not sure how much time we have left, Adam.
So I think we're ready to move on to Brandon.
Okay, so I want to thank Nathan's great presentation, and hopefully I'll get some questions on this protocol. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. All right, so if you could, Bob, if you could stop sharing your screen, I'll share Brandon's presentation.
Good. Yeah. There we go.
There we go. And Brandon, if you could enable your video, I think we'll be ready to go.
It says the host has stopped it.
Uh-oh. let me see if I can fix that. There you go. You should be able to click on something now.
There I am.
There he is. All right.
All right. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Bob, Nathan, Lisa. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Brandon Schmitt. I'm the director of the Natural Resources Commission in Wellesley. I'm a certified ISA arborist, and I'm also on the executive board of the Massachusetts Tree Wardens and Foresters Association. So I want to dive right in and talk about some of the efforts that the local communities have been doing to address this gas leaks and trees issue. For the purposes of this webinar, we're focusing on the efforts in Arlington, Weston, Wellesley, and Salem. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. Not every solution is, not every size fits all towns or cities. And certainly if you're doing something else in your community, join us and provide that information, share that information. I think that's how this is gonna be successful. Just a quick thanks to the staff and all the volunteers who are working on this and provided information for this part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So we've all seen this. We've seen examples from Nathan and Bob. This is an anecdotal instance in Wellesley. What you see is a tree on the left that was suffering for years from a gas leak before we kind of knew about it. And what did we do on the right? We planted a brand new tree right behind it. Now in Wellesley, we plant setback trees as opposed to planting them in that lawn strip, the death strip. So that's an effort really to protect the trees. I think it has a benefit to the trees in regards to some of the gas leaks, but we probably wouldn't have done this if we knew what we did. So the picture on the right is actually from the GIS map analysis that we put together based on HEET data and a gas audit. And what you see is basically in between the two red triangles, which are the HEET data that show the unrepaired leaks, you see these green dots. Those are right at the location of this tree that we took out. So there's no indication from the HEET data that there's a leak there, but when we did the gas leak audit, we found it. So again, we're trying to avoid this situation where we're replanting and losing these trees. So using that as an example. Next slide. So walking through the key best practices, these have been talked about a little bit already. I did put advocacy twice on purpose. I think we need advocacy on the front end, pushing the science. We need advocacy to lobby our legislators to encourage these leaks to be fixed. We need to lobby for resources to do the studies and collect the information. And then on the back end, we need advocacy to fix this problem, to fix these leaks. So the picture on the right is a picture from our local Sustainable Wellesley group, did a gas leaks tagging tree. You know, gas leaks affect a whole host of our lives, including transportation, they're near our schools, but trees is one of those issues that people gravitate towards. They have their own trees, they know their trees and they love them. And I think it is an issue that people can rally behind. In order to really understand this, I think, you know, what we're seeing is the communities really need an active tree census. What I learned through this process is Salem, Arlington, and Weston all have an active tree census that is public facing. Wellesley's actually a little bit behind on this, so I have a new motivation to get that public facing and get that data out there so people are aware of what the public trees are. All the 4 communities have a gas leak audit to varying degrees. And then we can also work on tree preservation bylaws and really hammering down what trees are worth in all of our communities. Bob mentioned pre-planting leak testing for our new trees, so we're not putting new trees in the line of fire of these gas leaks, and also collecting data for post-mortality. For quality tree and leak data, I've talked about this. Salem has a fascinating analysis on their website that you can see where gas leaks are in relationship to the trees. On the right is an image that I put together a quick analysis through iTree, a free software where you can help prioritize planting, but you can also look at it the other way, that these would be the priority areas where you would want to focus any effort to do a pilot project to locate gas leaks in relationship to trees, because those are the areas where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck for new plantings or preservation of trees. And that's all by census block. So I'll talk a little bit more. Weston concluded during the fall of 2019 a multi-year phase inventory and assessment of trees located within public rights-of-way. The working group was established to examine issues that impact the health of the public trees. You can go to the next one. Thanks. What this shows is this is an analysis that they did with Bob that shows the location of every tree or every leak rather, and how many trees were within the leak zone. So they're using the new accepted method of the leak extent, where they measure the physical size of the leak on the ground, and they were able to identify how many trees were within that leak. That's going to help them prioritize and tell the utilities which leaks to focus on first. This is kind of the gold standard of the leak analysis. Okay, next slide. So just real quick primer, you all may know this, but Chapter 87 governs all public shade trees and how we remove them. And in order to remove a public shade tree, you have to go through this process where you post and advertise. So there's an administrative effort that's involved. There's the cost of the trees of removal, and we should be really holding holding utilities and holding them accountable for the cost that's involved with this. Salem has a tree ordinance and a tree manual which specifically call out avoiding planting in a known leak location. I think in terms of tree valuations, there's a lot of different methods to do this. I think sometimes the simple ones are better, where the communities have, like Arlington, they've just said that every inch of a tree that's removed costs $350 to replace. Wellesley has a sliding scale on our tree preservation bylaw that grows the more inches that are removed. And I think really this helps streamline how we get compensated for these trees when they're removed. Next slide, please. So Bob talked about this. I think you're seeing this in more and more communities where before they plant, Arlington, for instance, every potential tree planting site within the public right-of-way is inspected using a gas sentry. If their tree warden locates a leak, he contacts the utility immediately, and they don't plant until the leak is repaired. Salem, I know, has recommendations to monitor those leaks near trees that are taken down. And I think the ongoing collection of that data is going to build the case of how these leaks are affecting trees. And it's all about the information. Next slide. Bob talked about this. I've attached our quote for Wellesley. I've got my century right here. You can see it. We purchased this actually through Community Preservation Act funds. Our CPC, Community Preservation Committee, funded this under open space, as well as, you could argue, historic, for protecting some of our historic trees. And you can see there it's $2,000. And we've engaged with Bob to train us on this. And, it's a low cost, high impact way to collect information and again, build that case of why this is an important issue. Next slide, please. So for next steps, I think we need additional training. We need to train staff to use these machines, train staff to look, to know what they're looking for in terms of gas leaks. We need to continue advocacy efforts and collaboration, and that's why it's fantastic that so many people have joined in on this. And in terms of collaboration, we're working on creating a Google folder with useful files, you know, potential bylaws, potential tree ordinances, and you know, just information sharing. So our tree group will continue to brainstorm ideas about this, and we welcome your participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Brandon. All right, if I could ask all of the panelists to put their videos back on. We'll start jumping into the Q&A. There's Nathan. We have you, Bob. All right, and Lisa, why don't you come back on too? That'd be great. Hey. All right, so we have a number of questions in the chat. First one was just asking Bob to tilt the camera so we can see his face, but I think we can see his face now, so I think we're good. We're good there. What do we have here? All right, so we had a question about catching the brand name and model number of the equipment that Bob recommends cities and towns own. This person said they heard, this is John Hayes, you heard $1,000 price and the $200 price. I think you sort of answered this, Brandon, but Bob, do you have anything further to add about the type of equipment you would recommend?
Yeah, to John, I did try to answer in the chat. The last time I bought, they were around $1,500, depending on what features you got. I recommend getting just a straight gas unit, and they have gone up in price a bit, so I don't know what the exact cost is. I know Brandon got one that maybe has the oxygen meter on it. So around $1,500 to maybe a little over $2,000, you can get all the equipment you need, the bang bar or screwdriver and CGI. It's really not really too outrageous a price.
Great, thank you. And I'm seeing some folks are putting questions in the chat and the Q&A. If we could try to keep it in the Q&A, that would be great. And I realize my video is not on. Just so there's only so many portals I have to look at here. We have a couple questions here about whether or not we can share these slides. Lisa, you think we'll be able to do that? I know we can get the email addresses of everybody. If everybody's comfortable, I think we can email it out after the presentation.
Absolutely.
All right. Does anyone know if Eversource or any of the gas utilities have ever been forced to purchase and plant comparable trees to the ones they are responsible for killing? I can answer it to my knowledge, no. I know we've filed claim for monetary damages and have been successful, but I'm not familiar, at least in Arlington, with direct tree for tree replacement. But I don't know, Bob or Brandon or Nathan, maybe you have a different perspective.
I believe they have, and I think the question should be posed to Eversource, but I believe the answer is yes. But I think that they should answer that question, and they certainly acknowledge what's going on, I believe.
Okay, Brandon, did you want to add anything to that, Brandon?
Not that I'm aware of, but I think if there's a choice between having I mean, obviously there's some economics involved, but I would rather have the Wellesley crew plant our trees than Eversource's contractors plant our trees if it's a matter of money versus planting. That's my take on that.
Okay, thank you. I had received an email question from an Arlington resident, Joanne Preston, asking, so she's saying, we were told that the gas company was not required to fix leaks because they were only at a certain grade. However, we cannot replace the trees because the gas leaks will kill them too. Will there be any future regulations that will require gas leaks to be repaired if the grade of the leak is sufficient to kill trees? I actually think that's a great question that really underscores the importance of the work we're doing. And I'll certainly let any of you answer, but I'll try from my perspective. Right now, the health of a tree or even public health is not one of the criteria that's measured when grading gas leaks. So we've been advocating for that change. We feel strongly, and it's one of the things that our gas leaks working group has been thinking about, and the whole entire multi-town gas leaks initiative has been thinking about, is how do we urge the legislature or the DPU to change these regulations to prioritize trees. So the answer is we're working towards it. I can't confidently say I see it on the horizon, but I know that it's one of the main thrusts of this group to try to achieve some change like that. Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything from your perspective.
No, I mean, I think you're right. I know that there was a provision in the Future Act regarding trees. It's hard to say what the prospects are for that legislation. I think what's really important is this advocacy. I'll just quickly introduce myself. I'm on the Wellesley Board of Selectmen, and also among the leaders of the Multi-Town Gas Leaks Initiative. I have a question, which I'd like to ask.
Go for it. Yeah.
So what has your experience been when a leak is repaired with the ability of a tree to recover? I'm just curious if you've ever actually seen a tree get better from a leak being fixed.
I can answer that, Lisa, and the answer is absolutely yes. The trees can recover. And I'll defer to what my arborist told me, and Brandon or somebody else can also come in. This was Carl Cathcart, said that typically if a tree goes beyond 40% decline, it's not coming back. But if we can catch it early and detect a leak around and say, let's get this leak fixed, let's get this on repair schedule, and this is where we're trying on the legislation to force them to do this. Rather than have gas companies try to get them to pay for a dead tree, let's save the living trees. Let's just get them to fix the leaks around the trees. And when you have a large mature tree, I showed that one specifically in Brookline, it was a 55-inch oak tree. You can't get that tree back. Nathan showed the beech tree. There are so many large trees. The Jackson tree on Washington Street at Newton was uptaking gas. And so getting these leaks fixed, we can save so many trees. So advocacy, what Brandon is talking about here, is key for everybody. Education, demand that these leaks be fixed. Up on Pill Hill with that huge oak tree is in front of these beautiful homes, and they're going to lose it. They're going to lose two trees right in front of your homes. I wouldn't want to lose one in front of mine. So advocacy, and yes, we can save them if you catch them early enough.
Great, thank you, Bob. So we've got 13 questions in the chat in about 10 minutes. So I'm gonna do my best to do a lightning round here. One of the questions is a suggestion that we tell folks how they can sign up to become part of the Multi-Town Gas Leaks Initiative. And I know, Lisa, you had also suggested we give people info about how they could sign up for this tree initiative as well. So I would offer, if anybody's interested in signing up to work on this trees working group, they can email me at Chapdelaine, which is CHAPDELAINE at town.arlington.ma.us. You can also find that address on the town website, arlingtonma.gov, very easily. And Lisa, how would people best sign up for the broader initiative?
So anyone who got an email about this webinar from me is welcome to just reply to that email. You could also just put it in the chat if you want to be on the distribution list for the Multi-Town Gas Leaks Initiative. Just put your email in the chat.
Great, thank you. All right, so now we'll start to go through these. Bob, I think a question for you from Paul Popenchuk. Can you recommend a quality accurate gas monitoring device in addition to the gas entry?
I have a $200,000 gas monitor in my vehicle. I have a $40,000 monitor. Gas stuff gets expensive as you go up. I have a flame ionization unit that costs about $6,000. The gas detectors that I've put out, and ones that Brandon has, the Bascom Turner, I think, is your best value out there. If you want to go further, Bascom Turner has more expensive equipment, and what I really like about them is they're local made right here in Massachusetts, so you can get great service when you need it. So there are enhanced units at Bascom Turner. You can go on their website, bascomturner.com, see what they have. Their prices are all there, and they're terrific people to work with. I've been working with them for over 20 years.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Question of whether or not we can share this recording. We'll definitely work to do that. We're recording it, so I think we can access that and share it. Technical question from Laura Wagner. How did you determine the area of the gas leak as shown on one of Brandon's slides? Did you measure the gas in the soil and calculate the area that met a certain threshold, or how is a gas leak extent measured? I think that's probably you, Bob.
Yeah, I can do that. Well, we use basically the bang bar and the CGI and do continual holds until we get a 0 reading, and then map out where the readings are. So that's how it's done in the industry, and anybody can do the same thing. It's really not rocket science. It's just a matter of doing basically a grid pattern over any locus and recording the readings until you get 0 gas readings. So there's hundreds and hundreds of people that do it every day, testing these leaks.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Question from Lucy Quachado. Any grants that you know of that cities and towns could apply for to help with trainings, equipment, monitoring, removal, and replantings, et cetera? I'll say the monitoring and the equipment, I'm not familiar. Removal and replantings, there might be something available through the DCR on and off basis that you could look at for tree planting work. There's also some climate resiliency grants that have allowed for tree planting to be part of a climate resiliency strategy through the MVP, the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. So there are some avenues. I don't know, if, Brandon, do you have any grant sources you've explored in the past?
No, I mentioned the Community Preservation Act, and I know that's not applicable in all towns, only those that have adopted that legislation or a bylaw. But yeah, the DCR does have a community forestry division, and they do tree planting initiatives. I can't speak specifically if they've ever done anything related to gas leaks, but it seems like something they, it might be interesting to them.
Great, thank you. I had a question, another Arlington question from somebody in the chat asking why we haven't explored a setback program like Brandon has in Wellesley for the plantings. We have explored it, I'll say, a number of times, and the big challenge we have in Arlington is unlike the very nice lawns in Wellesley, a lot of our houses are only set back 10, 15 feet. So it's not impossible, but often we find ourselves planting over gas lines or water lines in the limited grassy area in front of homes. So it's something that the tree committee has looked at over the years, but due to the density of the community is pretty challenging. And I think the success of those setback programs probably depends on the nature and density of the community. Quick question, maybe someone knows the answer to. Does Newton have a tree warden? Does anybody know?
Yes, we do. His name is Mark Welch.
There we go. Look at that. Thank you. Question from Darlene Mellis. The idea of protecting mature trees is new to me. How would you suggest a community conduct a survey? Would you study crown dieback and test that tree site and the microbes, any way to fight back?
Well, I think if, starting with the last part, in terms of the microbes, I mean, fix the leak and the soil will begin to heal and it will begin to become more aerated. And in terms of a survey of the trees, I think the study that Bob did with Claire Scholart and the folks in Chelsea laid out a really excellent way to do a test for the effect of gas leaks and a rubric for assessing the degree of tree damage. So you can look at the materials and methods from that study, and it's a good way to establish the correlation.
Great, thank you, Nathan. All right, we've still got 13 questions. We're losing ground in 5 minutes. From Meghna Shah, do any towns get GIS data on gas leaks from NGrid? I know we get it in spreadsheet format. Does any of you get it in GIS layer?
No, it comes in the KMZ, which does take some manipulation through GIS.
Yeah, I think that's our experience as well. Question from
most recently, I'll just add that most recently we've been getting data on the SEI leaks, the significant environmental impact leaks, in spreadsheet form also. And I would just urge towns to request that information, because it really helps you zero in on your highest volume leaks.
Thank you. Question: how soon will the Google folder, on trees be ready, and who can get access? Who's managing that?
So I volunteered to pull it together. We need a place to house it. We're thinking, yeah, we have a couple of ideas, but soon. We'll definitely be sending out a link to it through our Multi-Town Gas Leaks Initiative email list. So if you're on that list, you will get the link.
Great, thank you. Question: can the town, from Eileen Matthew, can the town force the gas provider to fix leaks before planting if we detect leaks? And Eileen is from Marblehead. I think the straightforward answer is no. Brandon or Bob or Nathan, anyone want to take a shot at that? Or
I tend to agree. I think that the current legislation is pretty clear about how they're supposed to prioritize leaks, and those, I forget which order it is, class 3, if that's the most dangerous, those have to be addressed within a certain time period. And so that is how they are addressing leaks, not by proposed planting locations.
Thank you, Brandon.
The real problem, because if they're classified grade 3, they don't have any intention of repairing the leak. So you need to demand that they repair the leak. I don't know if you can force them, but asking nicely, I don't know, if you really want a tree, it's a difficult one.
I see lots of folks are signing up to be part of this initiative in the chat, so I don't know if Ann or somebody else is able to grab those before we wrap up. But
I'm actually grabbing them as they come in.
Great, great. Another question from John Hayes. Out of all municipal leaks detected, do we know what % are super emitters, and does National Grid and others respond quickly if these are detected?
Yeah, our study showed that with Bob and led by Margaret Hendrick showed that 7% of the leaks account for about 50% of the gas that's leaked into the air. So we call those super emitters.
Okay, great, thank you. Bob, a question from Tina McBride. What was the web address for the online gas leak map tool that you used? Was that the HEET map?
Yes, HEET, HEETMA, HEET, that's short, heatmassachusetts.org. Where you can, put in gas leak maps, HEET should come up, but it's heatma.org.
Great, thank you. I'll try to squeeze in one or two more here. Lisa Cunningham is saying, maybe I missed this, but I didn't hear anything about the necessity of stopping the use of gas completely. Extreme heat will also kill trees. We are at a tipping point. Communities must stop building with fossil fuels and enact similar legislation. I don't think you'll get an argument from anybody on this panel about that. I think our focus on this talk was short term. How do we save trees that are dying today with this gas infrastructure that's in the ground? But I don't want to speak again for all 5 of us, but I know many in this group are also working parallel tracks to move to a gas-free future. So I think you get no argument from any of us. Nathan, did you want to?
Well, no, I think you said it just right, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. All right, let's try to get one more in here, and then we'll call it a meeting. Environmental justice from Patricia Gazemba in Salem. Are there any enhanced sources of funding for trees, equipment, et cetera, especially for environmental justice communities? I have to say I'm not familiar with there being any specific funding. It's probably a good question that we could relay to the MAPC for future consideration, but does anybody else have any answer to that?
Does the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program have any environmental justice provisions in it, Adam?
I'd have to double check. I don't want to say no for sure. It doesn't jump to mind that there are, but that's certainly worth a look.
Yeah, it definitely has a preference for projects that are environmental justly related. Yeah.
For the implementation grants?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. All right, there we go.
it's a criteria.
Good. All right, well, we are past 2 o'clock. I think it's a good feeling at the end of a webinar like this when you have more, you could have used more runway. It means you had a lot of interest and you had an interesting topic. So I think my takeaway today is there's a lot of interest in what we talked about. I think at Max we had nearly 85 attendees participating. So I think that's, and a lot of names that I know I'm not familiar with, and I think probably the same for most of us. So I think we were able to gain a lot of interest about this very important topic. So I would say my further takeaway is maybe we should do this again soon and dive in deeper and give some more time for Q&A because it clearly is something that people care about. So with that, I'll thank our panelists again. I'll thank Lisa again for her energy and dedication and everything she's done to keep this ball rolling and to put this together. And I'll thank everyone for attending, and we'll wrap up for today, and we hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Adam.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for attending.
Thanks.